The legislature wrapped up the lame duck session with a 16-hour day that ended at 6 a.m. A few hours after it ended, I sat down with Governor Mike DeWine for our annual year-end interview. I want to start with what your priorities are, not for just 2023, but for the last term of your last job in elected office. What are your priorities?
Our goal is for every Ohioan to be able to live up to their full God-given potential. And to do that, we really focus on three things, and this is in no particular order. Jobs. Jim Rhodes said, more jobs is one way to get rid of some of the social problems that we have. It may not solve every problem, but it'll solve some of them. Jobs coming into Ohio, and it's not just Intel. We had Abbott today, big announcement, and we're going to continue to see that. So jobs is one. Number two is education, and by education I mean early childhood education. Fran's Dolly Parton Imagination Library, reaching out to pregnant mothers who are having difficulties, all the way through to a 60-year-old or 65-year-old who's still working and who needs to have their skills upgraded. So education. The third thing is mental health. John Kennedy made a commitment, and our country made a commitment. Last bill John Kennedy signed was a Community Mental Health Act. And the commitment was that we would deinstitutionalize people. We wouldn't lock them up anymore. They had a mental health problem. And we did that. But what we have not done is build that system from the ground up in community after community. We are on our way in Ohio to doing that. The legislature last night passed two major bills, $175 million, that are really going to focus on things that I've asked for to help build that system. So those are the three big things that we're going to focus on every single day.
You brought up the legislature, so I want to ask you about a couple of things that have come up during the lame duck session. Some of them passed, some of them are likely to return. What about the changes to the Step Up to Quality daycare program in Ohio? You had been concerned about those in the past. What about that?
I'm proud of what we've done in Ohio. Our daycare is now 100% rated, and we're moving forward. What we know from the data is that daycare that is of high quality changes outcomes. If it's not of high quality, many times it just doesn't matter and does not really impact that child's future. So we got to follow the science, follow what the data shows us, and look, we can always improve that. We can improve the ways that we measure it. We're open to do that, but we have to measure quality.
Staying on education, the bill that would ban trans athletes from participating in girls' sports, it did not get through lame duck, but will likely come back in the new session. You had said earlier this year, in 2022, that you don't think government should be regulating something when there are institutions and organizations like the Ohio High School Athletic Association that are already looking into this. So there are only, I think OHSAA said there are 4 trans athletes. There's some sources that say there's only 1 in Ohio. How do you feel about this bill and whether there's a need for it?
I think we have to look and see what the final language is. I always say, let's see what the language is. There's been, there's so many bills that get introduced, and sometimes on the same subject, there are 3, 4, or 5 bills with different language. So we're going to wait. I'm going to wait until I see that, the bill we thought was going to pass last night had been changed a number of times, but it never passed. So we're going to wait on that one.
That bill, when it came forward, about 200 extra pages were added to that bill. And I want to ask you, you're a former legislator. Is that fair? Is that something that you feel does a disservice to democracy when these things happen at the last minute?
Well, I've been in legislative body, as I was, of course, in the state Senate, and then I was in the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate. It's sort of human nature, I think. Every legislative body I've ever been in, a lot of things happen in the last 48 hours. And I guess you have to have a time, you have to have a deadline, and when you have a deadline, certain things happen. Now, if you're talking about an issue that's really not been debated before, that gets introduced at the last moment, I think that's a problem. That's certainly not the way it should be done. But many times these issues have been debated, and they finally get worked out at the end, and that's just sort of the way it works.
Do you think that there's enough bipartisanship happening in the legislature? I mean, Republicans have a supermajority, and they can do what they want. Do you think that there's enough bipartisanship where Democrats are being brought in as well?
You know, one of the things I'm proud of is that if you look at our two budgets, and we're preparing our third one, when you look at our two budgets, they both passed on a bipartisan basis. We had Democrats, we had Republicans overwhelmingly vote for both budgets. So I think that always should be the objective. And look, when you're talking about mental health, when you're talking about education, talking about jobs, I mean, these are areas that we ought to be able to come together on. We ought to, everybody wants more jobs in the community. People want education. They understand how untreated mental health tears families apart and how frustrating it is for families when they can't get the help for their son or daughter or their mom. So these are things that should bring people together, and I think part of my job is to try to do that anytime I can.
You've been an advocate for Ohio state parks. There's legislation that would allow for fracking in state parks, which former Republican former Governor John Kasich had opposed. How do you feel about that, and are you concerned about what that's going to do to the parks?
People love the parks. They started going back to the parks a lot more during COVID because they could get out and love them. We have invested a lot in our parks because frankly they were neglected for a long time. We've invested significant amount of money with great bipartisan support in the state legislature. We have 75 state parks in Ohio. They are free. 60% of the people who go to a state park pay nothing because they're there in and out during the day. So we're very proud of our state parks. There was a bill that was passed under Governor Kasich, and the bill mandated that the state Ohio Department of Natural Resources set up a commission, and that commission come up with a procedure by which this fracking could take place. The commission has met, but they've not come out with their final rules. Yesterday, the legislature, had a bill that they were considering that simply said you have to move forward very, very quickly on that. So we're going to see what the final language is, but there's already a bill on the books, even before this bill, which says we have to allow fracking in our state park.
Should Ohio enact a total ban on abortion, or should the 6-week ban that you signed in 2019 still being litigated, should that be the final word? And if that should be the final word, shouldn't there be some clarification, some exceptions? What do you think those should
Karen,
be?
First of all, I always preface any remarks about abortion this way. Good people are on both sides of this issue. They feel very, very strongly. I feel very strongly. I am pro-life. I think we're dealing with a human being. I think it's an obligation of the state to protect life. But I also know there are other people on the other side that are good people, people I know, and we have to respect them. So let's have that debate in a very civil way. Second, I'm pro-life. I hope we end up with a bill that protects human life. I think, though, it's important, and I've expressed this to the state legislature, that whatever they pass, that it be a bill that can be sustained. In other words, we have in Ohio, people have the right to go to the ballot. They have the right to override the legislature or even go directly to the ballot and come up with something new. And so we have to understand that whatever the legislature passes, ultimately the people are going to have the ability to vote on the issue. And it's important that we have something that can get enough consensus that it does not get overridden on the ballot.
On that note, there was a measure that would try to change that and make that a 60% voter approval to get a constitutional amendment into Ohio's Constitution. You would not have to sign this to get that to the May ballot. Do you have any, what are your thoughts on it? Should Ohioans, should we have to get a 60% threshold?
I'm listening to the debate on it. It's not something I sign or veto. It would happen if the legislature does it. We thought that the legislature, again, they gave all signal that they were going to vote on this yesterday.
They still could come back in January
and
do
it. But one would assume that this issue will come back up in January, and I'm going to be thinking about it.
But you don't have an opinion right now?
I don't have an opinion today.
During the redistricting process, you expressed concern and frustration about the whole process as it went on for more than a year. Would you support a proposal for an independent redistricting commission to take politics out of the process, as your fellow Republican and retiring Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor says that she wants to see?
I think clearly the current system, unfortunately, does not work. I think we saw that played out week after week, and we could not get an agreement. We had the Ohio Supreme Court involved time after time after time, and it even got to the point where one of the great objectives that we had, that the people had, and that was that we have compact districts and that we also had very competitive districts. More competitive districts was good. We ended up with a Supreme Court decision which actually caused us to have fewer competitive districts. No one intended that, I don't think. But so that shows that we have a problem. So we have to go back to the drawing boards. We got to get Republicans and Democrats together and frankly come up with a new constitutional amendment. That's very difficult to do, takes some time to do, but that's really what needs to be done.
So you'd like to see this go to the Constitution, go to the voters again?
Yeah, again, it's not easy though. I mean, we talk about, oh, let's have this nonpartisan commission. Well, okay, is it really nonpartisan? You know, does it favor one side or the other? I think the way you start is you go back and you say, what are the objectives? And let's list what these objectives are. And then let's try to put something together. What I learned is that when you have legislators of each party involved, they're pretty close to this. You know, they're going to be running or their friends are going to be running. It just is tough. It's just tough, and reasonable people come up with different points of view. So I think we have to do something different.
I have to ask you about the election. You obviously won big. There are some exit polling that suggests that people made the decision to vote for you at the beginning of the campaign. You had a lot of money, you had a lot of name recognition. You seem to be coming into the election with poll numbers showing you were going to win and win big potentially. Why then did you make the choice to join former President Trump, who is a divisive figure for obviously Democrats and even some Republicans? You didn't need his support, arguably. Why did you take his endorsement and campaign with him?
Well, first of all, I was surprised that we had better than 62, almost 63% of the vote. That's, I think, the third highest vote in Ohio history. So I was surprised by that. Nowhere during the campaign did I think we would get those kind of numbers. I thought we were going to win, but I didn't think we'd get those kind of numbers. I'm very happy. We got about a third of the African American vote, which for a Republican is about 3 times higher than it usually is. I'm very proud of that fact. Union households, again, as a Republican, we got better than 50% of those union households. Did well among women, did well among men. So I'm very pleased with where we came out. As far as going to the Trump rally, that really was a rally. Certainly the president was there, but it was a rally for J.D. Vance. I had spent the previous week, or a good part of the previous week, campaigning with J.D. around the state of Ohio, along with the other candidates, Republican candidates. I went there to support J.D. Vance. And I thought that was appropriate. I think it's important that he win. I think he's going to be, he won. I think he's going to be a very, very good United States Senator.
Are you at all concerned that former President Trump has been aligned with people like Nick Fuentes, the anti-Semitic white nationalist Holocaust survivor, or Holocaust denier rather, especially since the Anti-Defamation League says anti-Semitic incidents in Ohio have gone up 92% in 2021.
Yes, we have a problem. We have to denounce these individuals who are Holocaust survivors.
Or deniers.
Deniers, excuse me.
You just did the same thing I did, yes.
Holocaust deniers, we have to denounce them. My father was at Dachau shortly after it was liberated. He came back and told me the stories of what he had seen. We still had some of the Jews who had survived and were there and emaciated. His stories will stay with me, the rest of my life. We're seeing anti-Semitism increase in the state of Ohio and across the country, and we must denounce it every opportunity that we can.
In the last year, you announced some great economic news for Ohio and Intel, the LG Honda battery facility, Abbott, you just mentioned a little while ago. There was a lot of attention on Ohio with that, but in the coming weeks, there's going to be a lot of attention on Ohio with the trial of Republican former House Speaker Larry Householder. And I'm just wondering, do you feel like that potentially is going to change the national perspective that you were hoping people would have about Ohio?
No, look, our system, I'm a former county prosecuting attorney, as you know. By and large, juries get it right. Whatever the jury comes up with, I think we have to support the rule of law.
Do you think people think there's corruption in Ohio?
Look, I mean, people are going to listen to the evidence when it comes out, and we will simply see what that evidence is. I don't think we know all the evidence at this point, but look, the system. What I tell people is, look, the system works by and large. And as a former prosecutor, I'll tell you, I didn't agree with every time the jury came back not guilty. They didn't come back not guilty too often, but they did. And but after I thought about it, for a few days, I thought, well, maybe we just didn't have enough evidence. And you have to convict someone beyond a reasonable doubt. So I'm a great believer in our system. We have a system. Let's let that system work next month. Let's see what happens. We all have the chance to read it in the paper or have you report on it, and people will make their own decision. Look, Ohio got a tremendous amount of attention, I think, because of Intel. And I told our team as we were competing for Intel, and we were one of 40, and we were a long shot when we began it. But I told our team, look, we know this is going to have big impact to Ohio if we get Intel. It's going to mean a lot of jobs. It's going to have great spin-off effect. But I told our team the other thing it's going to do is send a signal to people and businesses across this country that if you're thinking about moving, if you're thinking about expanding, you need to look at Ohio, because Ohio has some special things that are going on. And because we got Intel and some of the other companies that we've been able to get, people are taking a second look at Ohio, and we're having more inquiries than we've ever had before. And we're going to get not only our fair share of those companies, we're going to get more than our fair share of those companies.
In fairness, though, there is some public policy that's being discussed at the State House that seems to discourage diversity and community and seems to be very divisive. Does that hurt the effort to try to bring young people and keep young people in Ohio and bring some of these jobs?
As governor, I think I have an obligation to talk about diversity. As I look to the future, we need more people in Ohio. We need people who want to come here and work, raise their families. Look at the refugees that are in the state of Ohio. I've tried to do what I can to say, look, we welcome you in Ohio. Whether you're a Ukrainian refugee or some other country, we welcome you. We want you part of Ohio. We want you to stay here. We want you to raise your family here. We want you to work here. And so, again, as a governor, I have an obligation to use the bully pulpit of the office, that big megaphone, and you're going to continue to see me in the months ahead do things that send that signal that we welcome people here.
You had said when you were inaugurated, and you're going to have a second inauguration here shortly, you had said when you were inaugurated that you were going to be a governor for all Ohioans. Do you feel that you've done enough for specific populations who feel like that they are under threat? People like the LGBT community, people like Black Ohioans, people who feel that they aren't being protected and heard, especially by Republicans?
I don't think we can ever do enough. And I ask myself that all the time, have I done enough? And we keep looking for ways that we can do more, and we will do more.